Hi, everyone. I'm Abhishek Chakravarty. I'm an assistant professor at Sai University in Chennai, India, where I teach law and regulatory studies. And this video is a brief presentation for submission 40 at Data for Policy 2021 conference, which is titled on our research work, Regulation of Emerging Technologies in India, Challenges and Recommendations, which I have co-authored with my colleague, Archana Sivasubramanian, who works at Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. Before I get into the specifics of our paper, I want to discuss a very generic question. The question is, why do we need to regulate emerging technologies? Instead of directly jumping into the answer, let me walk you through two different scenarios, uh, specifically narratives, on the use of similar technology by the same actor, which is the government, but for contrary purposes. The technology in discussion here are drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, which are guided by remotes, computers, and AI. So in February this year, there was this massive glacial disaster in the Indian state of Uttarakhand, which is located right in the lap of the Himalayas. So there were several construction workers working there on a dam and some other constructions where, there was a glacial runoff and a huge debris fell upon the workers. So timely deployment of drones helps save and trace over 2 dozen people in a terrain where even, surveillance aircrafts, helicopters, or no other technology can move into. There are several other instances of drones being used for search and rescue operations in India. And there are instances where they have also been used for medical emergencies and even vaccine distribution. But contrary to this, what we see, there are also instances where the government has used drones for surveillance upon its citizens. For example, last year, the country saw massive protests. First, it was against the amendment of India's citizenship laws, which many termed as unconstitutional. And second, it was against a set of farm laws, which infuriated several farmers across the country who sat in for long-term protests around the capital city of Delhi. In both these protests, it is alleged that several drones equipped with facial recognition technologies were used by the police and the government machinery to identify these peaceful protesters. And they feared that, this footage from the drones could be used against them for vindictive measures by the government for standing against the laws. And this fear, I would say, is not unfounded, because in many countries across the world, we see that government has been using technology as means of surveillance over its citizens, keeping a track of their movement, phone records, emails, and everything else which is private. There was also recently this Pegasus controversy in India, where there were allegations of phone and WhatsApp tracking. And I don't want to get into the details of it now, but not just the government, but many private entities and corporations have also used technology for their own benefit, and often at the cost of undermining people's privacy, choice, and other rights. The issue of algorithmic harms is one such major concern. Point which I want to bring out here is that we need to regulate emerging technologies to prevent its misuse, either by the people or the government or corporations, and ensure that these regulations provide the right balance in safeguarding the interests of the state, enhancing ease of doing business, promoting democratic rights, and encouraging innovation that benefits the universe of emerging technology. So through our paper, which I'm discussing via this video, we recommend certain regulatory approaches, which I will discuss soon, to ensure optimum use of technologies without democratic harms. We have analyzed India's drone regulation over last couple of years to investigate the regulatory vision and outline when it comes to regulating emerging technologies in the country. So if we look at the use of drones in the country, the first use of drones can be traced back in 1999 during the Kargil conflict between India and Pakistan, where drones were used for military purposes. However, civilian use of drones became a news in 2014 when a pizza was delivered in Mumbai using drones. During this time, there were several other reports of unregulated usage of drones in India, including one instance where, you know, there was a drone flying allegedly and very suspiciously over high security zone of the residence of the Indian president and the parliament. So, unable to regulate such, increasing usage of drones in the country, especially in high security zones, the government and regulators became perplexed and alarmed. And because of that, in October 2014, through the Director General of Civil Aviation, which is the regulatory authority, the government of India announced a complete ban on drones in India. To quote the words of the regulator, they stated that UAS has the potential for, large number of civil applications. However, its use, besides being a safety issue, also poses security threats. The airspace over cities in India have a high density of manned aircraft traffic. Due to lack of regulation, operating procedures, standards, and uncertainty of technology, UAS poses threat for air collision and accidents. So while drones were banned in India, worldwide drone usage made significant progress in all spheres, actually, from agriculture to infrastructure, power, e-commerce, media and entertainment, healthcare, disaster management, and so on. In fact, in 2016, a report by Goldman Sachs predicted that over $100 billion of spending in commercial drone sector in upcoming 5 years. Some Chinese companies like SZDJI Technology Corporation Limited controlled over 70% of commercial and consumer drone market with an estimated revenue of $1 billion. So the lack of proper vision, proper regulatory vision and outline actually cost India a lot in the drone space, from economic as well as from technology point of view. Global progress in drone technology and usage, the government of India in 2016 came up with a set of draft regulations on drones. So based on weight, drones were divided into 4 categories, which were micro, mini, small, and large. And also, as per the regulations, companies and people using drones had to avail a unique identification number, which was to be issued by the regulatory authority, which is DGCA. This unique identification number, however, could be only availed by either Indian nationals or companies which were run by Indians with principal business in India. So at this point of time, many tech policy researchers argued that the guidelines were flawed, primarily because it did not allow foreign players to operate, which could eventually restrict expansion and technological progress of drone industry. Furthermore, there were regulatory gaps which existed from the concerns of privacy, trespass, and other legal liabilities and ownership of airspace. So these guidelines never came into effect, and the previous blanket ban continued. Again, in 2017, another set of draft guidelines came out of DGCA. This time, a 5th category of drones based on weight were introduced, and this was called the nano category. To be in this category, a drone had to weigh less than or equal to 250 grams. The new guidelines also propose several actually operational restrictions, that drones had to operate within visual line of sight, only daytime restrictions, daytime operations were allowed, and drone usage was restricted up to 200 feet from the ground. And It also introduced the concept of restricted areas for drone operations, which included areas within 5 kilometers from airport, 50 kilometers from international borders, and beyond 500 meters into the sea. The public comments on these guidelines were invited, and the guidelines were supposedly to be finalized by December 2017, but this did not happen even until early 2018. And from a close reading of this guideline, it is evident that one of the primary purposes of it was to prevent disturbances to operations of commercial aircrafts. As we know that, there were certain restricted areas brought in for drones, especially around airport, and also, prevent drone usage in areas of security concerns, especially over strategic positions, government buildings, and defense installations. However, again, there remain several unaddressed policy gaps, including absence of import standardization and quality control of drones, the non-existence of protocol in case of accidents, and the issue of privacy and trespass. So after years of blanket ban and a series of draft guidelines, in 2018, DGCA finally came out with a concrete drone regulation in the country through a regulation named Civil Aviation Rules on Remotely Piloted Aircraft Systems, which was popularly known as Drone Regulation 1.0. It mandated requirement for obtaining, again, a unique identification number and also unmanned aircraft operation permit. Besides these, other operational requirements were needed, like written permission from local police officers before operating drones. And non-compliance of these, permissions or permits, or even the unique identification number, attracted strict penalties, which included actions like imprisonment, hefty fines under India's penal laws and aircraft laws. Evidently, these regulations were very harsh, and the concept of no permission, no takeoff was brought about. But however, this was done through an enabling platform called the Digital Sky, which was the only, one of the few positive things about this regulation. And it was through this online platform that, which made taking permissions for drone operations easier. However, flying restrictions still remain, that drones could not fly beyond line of visual sight. Maximum height for drone usage was 400 feet from the ground. Night operations were still restricted. So these actually, had actually, restricted businesses and corporations from using drones for commercial purposes. While in different parts of the world, people were talking about drone-based delivery systems and other usage of drones in the commercial space. In India, these regulations actually stopped or restricted the usage of drones for commercial purposes. Since then, in the last 3 years, there have been several small changes which have been brought about through draft guidelines, often attempting to close the policy gaps and address some of the long-standing concerns on security. Some of these changes which have been brought about have been positive. However, what we see that core issues like privacy, trespass, ownership of airspace, use of drones by the government, for public surveillance, and several issues which threaten the rights of people or cause democratic harms still remain ignored and unaddressed. An analysis of India's drone regulations make evident certain gaps which exist in India's regulatory approach. The first challenge is the dynamic nature of the technology landscape, where, where new technologies often put government and regulators in a state of perplexity. So the regulators often, what they do when they see a new technology, they try to prescribed guidelines, but with a deep vacuum in regulatory thinking and vision. Like we saw in case of drone technology in 2014, when people started using this new technology, the government was in a state of, state of alarm. They were perplexed, and therefore they issued a complete ban on drones. This approach has always been knee-jerk, and can be termed as a response regulation to control a particular unregulated space or situation. And these regulations are merely need-based and follow the same age-old command and control approach. So whenever a need arises, like there was a need to regulate drones, and again there came a point of time where the regulators saw that world across drones were being used, so they needed to lift this ban from drones, however restrict its usage. So this has all been need-based, and the same command and control approach of regulatory thinking have been followed. But when it comes to technology, it is far more effective. What we see, it is far more effective to actually establish regulatory principles rather than just trying to write rules that often only apply to limited implementation of that technology. This would help create a regulatory outline instead of trying to come up with specific rules as and when necessary. And also, Indian regulators neither seek to understand technology they regulate, nor they adequately pay attention to public needs like privacy, algorithmic harms, legal liabilities, and democratic values. So even if we analyze the drone regulations, we have seen that guidelines after guidelines, although issues of privacy do exist, these issues have not been addressed so far. There are no guidelines on privacy. So they seem to be more states focused than public focused, because we see that the primary purpose when first drone guidelines were brought in was to safeguard state establishments, defense installations, but did not focus on issues of privacy or trespass or other such legal liabilities, which means that the regulators seek to further and enhance state interests through the regulatory mechanism, as opposed to furthering public innovation and purpose. Now, the question is that all these problems exist in regulatory thinking and approach. And the question is, how do we address this issue, and what approach do we adopt? To put it simply, what we need is a co-regulation where regulators work with stakeholders, consumers, firms, suppliers, engineers, lawyers, and ethicists to build consensus on standards. This regulation needs to be adaptive, in that it needs to be dynamic with faster feedback loops. Many might think, why is co-regulation and not self-regulation? The problem here is that the approach of self-regulation for emerging technologies actually work only in good faith. But most often we see that private players aim at maximizing profits and they become dominant players. And when they become dominant players, they abuse their position by overriding or skirting legislative authority. Like presently, we see a conflict between the Indian government and Twitter, where the government is accusing Twitter of overriding and skirting government's rules and regulations and legislative authority. And this has led to a conflict. So soft regulatory measures are not fully comprehensive. Regulating emerging technologies has to be studied from the lenses of human rights, from the lenses of democratic values, and not just from the perspective of economic efficiency. This is because emerging technologies are not merely places that facilitate businesses, but they are also public spaces on their own, where issues like say equality, surveillance, discrimination, free speech, and this information actively conflict with other transactional elements. What is required in Indian technology regulatory space are actually clear lines of accountability, state capacity, and an urgent need for knowledge capacity. We know that the digital ecosystem is over changing and over evolving space. Therefore, what we need are that the regulations need to be grounded in standard values or certain standard principles that need to serve as signposts. And this needs to be co-created through transparency, trust, knowledge, and extensive participation of all stakeholders. We need more policy and legislative tools and interim remedies to address potentially abusive conducts and new definitions of theories of harms to scrutinize new technologies. Indian regulators have only been reactive thus far. We only have seen reactions whenever a new threat or a new technology emerges to, just going ahead to regulate those. But what they need to do is take an adaptive approach to regulation in order to find the right balance. So the right balance is required in safeguarding interests of the state, enhance ease of doing business, promote democratic rights, and encourage innovation that benefits the usage of emerging technologies. The brief, summary of our research work, which we have done on regulation of emerging technologies in India, challenges and recommendations. Please feel free to contact us and do let us know your thoughts and feedback on the same. And I would like to especially thank Data for Policy team for giving us this opportunity to present before a crowd our research work, and I hope you find it interesting, and please feel free to contact us. And thank you so much. Have a great day.